The wind came down the mountain like it wanted to peel the skin off anything still outside. Rowan Hale felt the temperature drop even before his weather radio crackled out a warning whiteout in under 20 minutes. "Ember inside," he called. The dog didn't move. The lean brown and gold Malinois stood rigid at the tree line, one paw lifted, ears pinned toward the frozen slope below the cabin. A second later, her hackles rose. She gave a sharp, uncertain bark, not at the sky but at the ground. "Quit it, girl. Storm's bad enough." He stepped off the porch snow, already stinging his cheeks. The air should have been knife cold, yet his boot soles met a faint warmth seeping up through the crusted snow like breath under a blanket. Then the earth shuddered, once a slow, hollow thump from somewhere deep below. The second thump was louder, closer, and Ember started backing away from the cabin as if something under it had just woken up. The storm hit faster than the forecast promised. Snow churned sideways in thick, blinding sheets, swallowing the pines and dimming Rowan's porch light to a weak yellow pinprick. Ember kept edging backward, nose, low tail, stiff every instinct pointing toward the slope where the warmth had seeped through the ice. Rowan knelt beside her, pressing a gloved hand to the ground again. Nothing now, only cold, bitter, and absolute. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe the storm rattled his senses. But Ember wasn't confused. She let out a low, trembling whine he'd only heard once before, years back, seconds before the mountainside gave way during the rescue mission he never forgot. "Easy, girl," Rowan whispered, but the reassurance tasted hollow. A break in the wind carried a faint sound up the slope. Not wind, not ice cracking. A pulse, slow, rhythmic, deliberate, like something enormous taking a breath beneath the snowpack. Ember snapped her head toward the noise muscles, tensing. Rowan felt the vibration a moment later, crawling up through the soles of his boots. Lightning wouldn't strike in a snowstorm, but whatever that was, it might. And the terrifying part wasn't the sound itself. It was that Ember seemed to recognize it. The pulse faded with the storm, but the unease stayed lodged in Rowan's chest long after the wind stopped shaking the window panes. By morning, the sky had cleared into a washed-out silver, the kind that made the mountains look carved from old bone. Dawn spilled weak light across the cabin floorboards, highlighting the damp paw prints Ember had tracked in during the night. She hadn't settled until nearly sunrise. Even then, she slept lightly, paws, twitching ears, reacting to sounds Rowan never heard. Rowan stood at the stove, watching the kettle tremble as it warmed. The steam eased the bite in the air, but didn't quiet the memory of the ground warming beneath his hand. Strange how certain sensations insist on lodging deeper than logic. The soft rise of heat, the vibration like a heartbeat, Ember's quiet whine. It all sat with him unwelcome. He was not a man unfamiliar with strange phenomena. Cold weather rescues had taught him how sound carries differently through frozen earth, how lakes groan with shifting ice plates, how mountains speak before they break. He had survived all that, but he'd never felt warmth rising through a frozen hillside. Ember stretched and padded to his side, nudging his thigh gently. "Breakfast first," Rowan muttered, pouring kibble into her bowl. She waited for permission, a habit from her training, until he nodded. The dog ate quickly, then trotted to the door and sat gaze fixed on the tree line. Rowan exhaled, rubbing the stubble on his jaw. "We're not going back out there until I'm sure the ground's stable." Ember didn't blink. She simply stared the way she always did when she believed something mattered. Rowan grabbed his coat reluctantly. "Fine," he murmured. "We'll check the area, but just the ridge, no farther." Ember's tail flicked once relief, or maybe agreement. Dry Creek Ridge wasn't much of a town anymore. A handful of cabins leaned against the foothills like aging relatives holding each other up. Rows of shuttered storefronts lined Main Street, a diner that still lit its sign on weekends, a bait shop that mostly served as a gossip hub, a gas station struggling to stay open after the state diverted tourist routes years ago. Rowan had drifted in 3 winters back, a man carrying nothing but a military duffel and a dog with sharper instincts than he had reasons for staying alive. To the locals, he was the quiet stranger who repaired engines, cheap split wood for those who couldn't, and kept mostly to himself. Isolation suited him. Silence even more. Dry Creek was the kind of place where people pretended not to notice when someone carried heavy memories. They simply made space, offered a thermos of coffee, and didn't ask questions. Sometimes Rowan wondered if that was mercy or avoidance. His cabin sat on the western slope a mile from the nearest neighbor, and much farther than that from anything resembling a city. Ephraim Whitlow had built it decades ago, long before Rowan ever arrived, and the bones of the place were old but sturdy. Thick beams, reinforced corners, narrow windows made for harsh winters. A single photograph hung over the table, Rowan in uniform flanked by 4 other men from his unit snow-whipping around them during a mountain exercise. Their faces were half-shadowed beneath helmets, but Rowan didn't need clear images to remember each one. He remembered too much. His fingers always paused when brushing dust from the frame as though touching the glass might disturb something sacred. Ember would watch him when he lingered there, her eyes soft and steady. "Not today," Rowan murmured, turning away. He didn't like revisiting the past unless forced, and when it arrived uninvited as dreams, as flashbacks, as sudden silence in the middle of routine tasks, he weathered it the way he weathered storms. Endure. Wait. Keep moving. Snow crunched under his boots as Rowan and Ember climbed the ridge. The storm had dumped nearly 2 feet of powder clean, untouched, deceptive in how it hid everything beneath. Ember led, weaving through the trees with purpose. Her breath puffed in short clouds. Every few steps, she stopped nose to the ground, ears rotating like radar dishes. Rowan knelt beside a fallen birch where he had felt the warmth the night before. "Show me." Ember tapped the ground with her paw. Once, twice. Then she lay down, nose pressed to the snow. Rowan pulled a glove off and pressed his bare palm to the crust. Cold. Completely cold. Not even residual warmth. No hint of thawing. "You're chasing ghosts," he whispered, unsure if he meant Ember or himself. But Ember shifted, turning her head toward the base of the ridge where a cluster of old pines leaned inward, their trunks forming a natural archway. She barked softly. Rowan frowned. Tracks. He followed her gaze and saw faint impressions in the snow. Not footprints exactly. More like shallow ripples evenly spaced like a series of small concave dips. They didn't resemble animal trails or ski prints. They almost looked like... Rowan crouched deeper. Like the snow had lifted and resettled in a rhythmic pattern. He touched one of the indentations with 2 fingers. The snow there was finer, almost crystalline, as if it had melted and refrozen faster than its surroundings. "Not natural," he muttered. Ember moved ahead, nose close to the ground. Her tail stiffened as she approached a cluster of broken branches. Rowan joined her and discovered something tangled in the brush. A thin strip of metal no wider than a pencil. One end was serrated, the other connected to a wire snapped clean. "Drone debris," Rowan said softly. "Not civilian grade either." Ember huffed, pawing at the dirt. "They were scouting," he murmured. "Scanning heat signatures. Looking for something." Rowan pocketed the metal fragment uneasy, twisting in his stomach. But it wasn't the drone piece that bothered him most. It was the memory of warmth rising through the snow. He straightened. "We're heading back. Storm's coming again." Ember didn't move. She stared at the ridge slope with stubborn resolve, nose pointed toward a cluster of trees where the snow had formed a perfect circular depression. Rowan's breath frosted in front of him. "Something under there?" he asked. Ember didn't break eye contact. "That was enough. We'll check it later," he said, tugging lightly on her collar. "I promise." Her tail flicked acceptance, mixed with reluctance. The hike back was quiet, except for the crunch of their footsteps. Rowan's thoughts churned with old memories he didn't invite. The last time he felt ground vibrate beneath him, he was leading a rescue team above a mining tunnel in Montana. They'd been responding to a collapse. His dog back then, Ash, had stopped, just like Ember did now. Head tilted. Listening. Rowan hadn't listened. Minutes later, another collapse triggered a chain reaction. 2 men from his team didn't make it out. Ash didn't either. Guilt didn't just shape him. It hollowed him out. After the funerals, after the investigations and the reports, Rowan walked away from everything. He told himself he was no good to anyone. He told himself he would never again ignore a warning from a dog he trusted. He kept Ember not because he wanted a companion, but because he needed a chance to do it right this time. Sometimes he wasn't sure if that was selfish or redemption. By late morning, Rowan needed to head into town for fuel and supplies. Ember hopped into the truck bed, curling against the toolbox like she owned the space. The old pickup coughed awake reluctantly, the engine making its usual complaints. When Rowan rolled into Dry Creek, a handful of locals waved from behind scarves and mittens. In towns like this, a nod was more meaningful than a full conversation. He parked outside the diner and stepped inside. The place smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and fried dough. A little bell jingled above the door. "Morning, Rowan," said Mrs. Keller, the owner, wiping down a counter. Her silver hair was tied in a bun tight enough to withstand tornadoes. "Storm treats you all right, fine," Rowan replied. "Just grabbed a few supplies." She narrowed her eyes. "You look like a man who hasn't slept." He shrugged. "Storm was loud." Mrs. Keller snorted. "Storms don't bother you. Something else did." Before he could respond, the overhead lights flickered, then went dim. A couple of customers turned toward the window as the wind picked up again. "Generators freezing," Mrs. Keller muttered. "Old thing doesn't hold up well below 0. "I can take a look," Rowan offered. She blinked. "You sure I'd owe you pie for a month?" Rowan gave a half smile. "I can live with that." He stepped behind the diner, fingers numb as he opened the generator's panel. The coils were frosted metal contracting from the cold. Ember watched nearby head close to the snow. "You're expecting trouble," Rowan murmured without looking up. Ember gave a low, soft whine. Rowan adjusted a broken sensor, cleared the ice around the intake, and primed the system again. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Lights inside the diner brightened. From the window, Mrs. Keller lifted both hands in triumph. "Hero," she called through the glass. Rowan shook his head. Just a fix. But helping her grounded him, made him feel human. He didn't know why small kindnesses hit harder than danger these days. On his drive home, clouds rolled in quicker than they should have. Ember stood up in the truck bed, nose to the wind, ears rigid. "Don't like it either?" Rowan asked. A low rumble shook the air. Not thunder. A subterranean vibration. Rowan slowed. The road trembled beneath the tires, barely but enough. "Okay," he whispered. "That's not normal." Ember barked once sharp, insistent. She leaped from the truck bed the moment Rowan stopped it, sprinting toward the tree line. Rowan followed, boots slipping on the slope as the tremor faded into silence. Ember halted at the base of the ridge. Rowan reached her and saw the snow shifting over a perfectly round indentation like a bubble rising, then settling again. "What are you trying to show me?" he whispered. Ember pressed her paw to the snow. A faint warmth bloomed beneath. Rowan's heart stuttered. "Not possible," he said, but his breath fogged unevenly. He crouched, placed his palm on the spot, and felt it again. Warmth. A slow, rhythmic pulse. A living beat. Rowan pushed backward instinctively, breath quickening. The ridge wasn't just shifting, it was breathing. Ember leaned against him, quiet, grounded. Rowan looked down at her. "You knew last night," he murmured. Ember blinked once. Rowan turned toward the slope, the world narrowing to the one impossible truth rising beneath his boots. Something alive, something warm lay under the frozen mountain, and it wasn't done calling. The warmth didn't fade this time. Rowan crouched on the ridge, snow gathering on his shoulders, palm flat against the pulsing ground. The heat was faint, barely above freezing, but in a world running on frost and wind, any warmth rising from beneath a mountain meant something unnatural was happening. Ember nudged his elbow once, impatient. "I know, girl," Rowan whispered. "I feel it." He scraped back a layer of snow with the edge of his glove. The exposed surface was smoother than frozen dirt, should be dark, glassy, almost polished. A thin crack ran across it like a seam. Through that seam, a warm breath exhaled against his skin. Rowan's pulse quickened. Then the ground vibrated again, 3 slow pulses evenly spaced. Thump, thump, thump. Ember stepped back, tail straight, ears locked toward the ridge, as if listening to something deeper than sound. A breeze swept across the slope, carrying a scent. Rowan didn't expect moss. Green living moss. Impossible in late January. He rose slowly. "Something's down there," Rowan said, voice tight. "Something that shouldn't be." Ember barked once, sharp and decisive. She started toward the clearing north of the ridge pause, landing lightly on snow as if following invisible tracks. Rowan hesitated and then followed her. The clearing was a place he rarely visited, mostly because it always felt colder than the rest of the ridge, a quiet hollow where wind funneled through the trees. Today, though, something was different. Steam curled from a small fissure near a fallen pine. Ember approached cautiously, sniffing the air. Rowan knelt, brushing frost from the surface around the crack. A metallic sheen glinted beneath. "What the hell?" He scraped away more snow until a triangular plate emerged, dark metal or stone, impossible to tell. Embedded within it was a peeling emblem, concentric spirals engraved into the surface like ripples frozen mid-motion. He traced the design with his thumb. It didn't feel like a logo. It felt old, purposeful. A piece of wood protruding from the snow caught Ember's attention. She pawed at it gently, looking back at Rowan. "Hold on," he murmured, brushing aside powder. Beneath lay a wooden charm, hand-carved, weathered smooth. The same spiral symbol was etched onto its surface. Rowan's chest tightened. This wasn't made by accident. He slipped the charm into his pocket. Ember had moved on, nose to the ground, tail alert. Rowan followed her gaze toward the tree line. Tracks. Not human, not quite animal either. Long, shallow impressions with even spacing. He stepped closer. "Snowmelt patterns," he whispered. But he knew better. They were too uniform. Ember froze again. A sound drifted through the trees. At first Rowan took it for wind, but wind didn't hum, didn't vibrate, didn't shift pitch like someone adjusting the dial on an old radio. This sound rose, dipped, and rose again. A resonance. He felt it in his ribs. Okay, Rowan said quietly. That's enough exploring for one day. But Ember didn't move. She stared at him, ears flattening as if insisting he listen. Rowan knelt beside her, letting the hum travel through him. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. It was alive. And then, the hum stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Cut off completely, leaving the forest too quiet. Rowan exhaled sharply. Something hurt us. The thought came uninvited, and it landed hard. Branches snapped behind them. Rowan spun Ember, stepping protectively in front of him. The sound grew louder, distant at first, then unmistakably close. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps measured and deliberate. Hello, Rowan called instinctively, lowering his stance. No answer. Ember growled, a low vibration rolling through her chest. A figure emerged through the pines, tall, wrapped in a thick parka hood pulled low. Rowan raised a hand cautiously. Easy, he called. Storm's coming. You shouldn't be out here. The stranger didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him. Instead, the figure knelt beside the fallen pine, examining the fissure in the ground. Rowan's breath hitched. He shouldn't know exactly where to look. Hey, Rowan repeated. This is private land. Still nothing. Ember barked sharply, breaking the standoff. Finally, the stranger turned his head. Rowan caught a glimpse of dark glasses, reflective even in the dim light. The man's voice when he spoke was flat. You shouldn't be near this site. Site. Not slope. Not clearing. Site. Rowan stepped closer. Who are you? The stranger stood, and Rowan noticed a patch on the sleeve of his parka. A stylized mountain range surrounded by a ring of stars. Not military. Government corporate. Before Rowan could ask again, the man stepped backward into the trees and vanished. No crunch of snow, no branches shifting. Gone. Ember bolted forward, sniffing the air where the man disappeared. Rowan grabbed her collar. No, we're done. Now. Reluctantly, Ember yielded. Rowan's fingers trembled as he held her close. That wasn't a hiker. That wasn't a local. Someone else knew. Someone was searching. They hurried back toward the cabin. The air thickened, carrying that strange, mossy warmth again. Every instinct in Rowan screamed to get Ember to safety. At the porch, Ember hesitated, looking back at the ridge. You're not wrong, Rowan murmured. But I need to think. Inside, Rowan took out the wooden charm, laying it gently on the table. The spirals caught the lantern light, casting faint shadows that curved across the wood like shifting tides. What are you? He whispered. Ember sat beside him, head pressed under his hand. Rowan looked into her amber eyes. You want me to follow the trail? Ember blinked once. Decisive. He rubbed her head. And if I'm ready to hear whatever's down there, another blink. Rowan exhaled sharply, tension swirling in his gut. He stood pacing once across the cabin, his breath fogged faintly in the air. A crackle from the old radio snapped his attention back. Static. Then a warped voice. A porting in, heat anomaly, ridge area. More static. A second voice. Copy that. Confirm pulse readings. Rowan's blood ran cold. They were scanning the ridge. His ridge. He snapped off the radio. Ember stood, muscles taut. You heard it too, Rowan whispered. He approached the window. Nothing but pines and snow, and yet the forest felt watched. He had choices. Few but real. Stay out of it. Pack up and leave Dry Creek Ridge behind. Or follow the one living thing that had never led him wrong. Rowan closed his eyes. Ember nudged his knee gently, firmly, like she used to do during training missions whenever he froze under stress. He opened them. Okay, Rowan said quietly. We look. The words tasted like a vow. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, not in the sky but inside the earth. Ember's tail lowered, determined. Rowan grabbed his pack, flashlight, and a length of cord. He opened the door. Show me. Ember dashed into the snow, leading him straight toward the spiraled clearing. Rowan didn't look back. The storm didn't matter. The stranger didn't matter. His fear didn't matter. What lay beneath the mountain was calling. And he had just answered it. Snow whispered against Rowan's jacket as he followed Ember back toward the spiraled clearing. Afternoon light thinned behind clouds, turning the forest blue and brittle. Every step felt as if the mountain itself listened. Rowan's boots sank noiselessly in the powder, but Ember moved like a flicker of gold and shadow between the trunks. Slow down, Rowan muttered. Ember didn't. She trotted ahead with a certainty that made something old inside Rowan, tense instinct or memory, he wasn't sure which. When he reached the clearing, the spiraled depression in the snow had grown deeper, its edges sharper, as if some force beneath the surface had exhaled during the night. Rowan knelt. Ember hovered close, nose twitching. He brushed away more snow and exposed the strange, dark surface he'd uncovered earlier. But now something else caught his eye, a faint geometric marking, almost invisible unless the light struck it at the right angle. A line, then another. Intersecting arcs forming a circle. Not natural, Rowan murmured. Ember whined softly. He reached out and touched the surface. Warm. Not as warm as yesterday, but warm enough that Rowan inhaled sharply. The temperature was rising again. From beneath the mountain, a vibration tremored through the ground so subtle he might have imagined it. Then the hum started again, faint, low, resonant. Ember stiffened. Rowan's breath fogged in a shaky plume. Whatever's under there, it's awake. The hum shifted pitch for a moment, a rise, a dip, as if responding to them. Ember stepped back suddenly, tail dropping, ears pinned. Not fear, recognition. Rowan knew the difference. Dogs like Ember trained, bonded, sharpened by years of working beside someone. They didn't fear the unknown easily. They reacted to patterns they understood before humans caught up. Rowan swallowed. You think this is alive? Her silence answered him. He stood, scanning the tree line. Snow carried whispers differently here, stretching sound into something distant and strange. The air smelled faintly of pine frost and something else. Something organic. Moss. Warm moss. His chest tightened. Last time he smelled moss in winter was Montana, minutes before the collapse. A flash stirred behind his eyes. Ashes bark. A warning too late. Snow breaking loose. Cold roaring down the slope. Weight. Crushing weight. Rowan's breath caught. Ember nudged his hand gently, sensing the shift. I'm okay, Rowan whispered, though he wasn't sure it was true. He forced himself to focus. We need answers. The stranger from earlier, the one with the spiral badge on his sleeve, didn't just stumble onto the ridge. He knew exactly where to look. And the drone debris Rowan had found, someone was scanning for heat signatures, which meant someone else knew. And that was more dangerous than whatever hummed beneath them. Rowan turned back toward the trees. We should head. A crunch froze him mid-sentence. Footsteps, rapid, uneven, not from behind, from ahead. Ember spun, teeth bared. A figure stumbled into the clearing, covered in frost, limping, clutching one arm against his chest. A ranger's jacket hung off his shoulders, torn along one side. His cheeks were raw with windburn, his eyes wild with panic. Rowan moved on instinct. Hey, sit down. You're hurt. The ranger shook his head violently, breath coming in ragged bursts. No time. Don't stay here. You need to go. Rowan steadied him. Easy. Sit. Ember circled sniffing, then backed off with a low growl. Rowan lowered the man into the snow. Tell me what happened. The ranger coughed hard, spitting flecks of blood. They're drilling. The East Ridge. Found thermal anomalies. They think it's a geothermal vent. Rowan's stomach dropped. Who's drilling? The ranger struggled for air. The company Voss Energy. They sent contractors, security. They blocked access roads. Anyone who gets too close, he winced, gripping his ribs. What did they do to you? Rowan asked sharply. Told them they were trespassing. They didn't like that. Another cough. They're pushing deeper every hour. If they puncture whatever's under there, the whole slope could go. Rowan's pulse hammered. What's under there? The ranger's gaze tightened on the spiraled depression. Something not natural. You've felt it, haven't you? Rowan didn't answer. The ranger nodded weakly. Thought so. Ember stood beside Rowan, ears angled forward. We need to get you medical help, Rowan said. No. You need to listen. The ranger grabbed Rowan's coat, voice trembling. Whatever's down there, it stabilizes heat. I took measurements before they jumped me. Everything around the anomalies is warmer. Like a microclimate. Warmth. Moss scent. Heartbeat hum. Rowan swallowed hard, and if they drill into it, the ranger laughed bitterly. Then we all freeze. His grip slipped. He slumped back unconscious. Rowan checked his pulse, weak but steady. No time to waste. Ember, Rowan said. Let's get him home. He hoisted the ranger over his shoulders lighter than he expected and trudged back toward the cabin. Snow thickened again, falling in heavy flakes that muffled everything except his own ragged breathing. Ember stayed ahead, weaving a path through the drifts. When they reached the cabin, Rowan laid the ranger on his bedroll. Ember lay across the doorway like a sentinel. Rowan knelt beside the unconscious man. Why here? Why now? A quiet knock startled him. 3 taps. Even. Calm. He froze. Ember growled low. Rowan approached the door and opened it a crack. A woman stood outside, mid-40s, wrapped in a heavy parka face, drawn with worry. Sheriff Mara Haskins. Rowan, she said breathlessly. You found him, Rowan blinked. How did you? She pushed in gently. A hiker saw tracks leading your way. I followed. Thank God you did. Her gaze fell to the ranger. Evans, she whispered. I thought he was dead. He was attacked, Rowan said. East Ridge. Contractors from Voss Energy. Her face paled. They're not supposed to start drilling until spring. They did. Rowan's tone sharpened. And they're using heat scanners. She exhaled shakily. I knew this town was on their radar, but not like this. Not with force. Rowan looked away, jaw tight. They're after something. Mara glanced at the wooden charm on his table. What's that? He slid it into his pocket. Found it near the ridge. You think it's connected? I think I've found 3 things in 24 hours. Warmth, vibrations, and people who shouldn't be here. Mara looked toward the unconscious ranger. Evans was investigating complaints from hikers, strange sounds at night, warm patches under snow. He didn't tell me what he found. Rowan stared at the spiraled symbol in his pocket. I think whatever he found is waking up. Mara took a slow breath. Rowan, what do you plan to do? Rowan looked at Ember. Ember's golden eyes held steady. I'm going back to the ridge, he said. Mara's jaw tightened. Then I'm coming with you. Rowan shook his head. No, stay with Evans. And if I'm not back by nightfall, lock your doors. She grabbed his arm firm. You're walking into something larger than you realize. Maybe, Rowan said. But it called. And I'm done ignoring calls. He grabbed his pack. Ember stood instantly. They stepped back into the snow. The wind shifted, and the mountain hummed again. The ridge was different this time. Not colder, not hotter, just aware. Rowan moved through the forest with Ember in tight formation beside him. Her steps were deliberate ears, rotating at every shift in the wind. The snow had grown lighter flakes, falling slow and silent, like ash drifting down from a distant fire. For a moment, Rowan wondered if the mountain wanted them there, or wanted to warn them away. When they reached the spiraled clearing again, Ember stopped abruptly. Rowan stepped forward, following her line of sight. Someone had been here. Fresh boot prints heavier than his circled the fissure. The snow had been brushed aside in a wide radius, exposing the dark, glassy surface. And in the center, something new. A metal tripod, a sensor unit on top, lights blinking. Thermal scanner, Rowan whispered. High-end. Ember growled softly, teeth bared. Rowan moved closer and crouched beside the device. The screen displayed a map of the ridge lit with patches of blue, green, and yellow temperature gradients. But one region pulsed bright gold, a perfect circle beneath the clearing, right under their feet. Well, Rowan murmured, that explains why they're digging. He reached for the sensor's battery pack, intending to remove it. A voice snapped behind him. Step away from the device. Rowan froze. Ember surged in front of him instantly, body low ready. Rowan turned slowly. 3 men stood among the trees. They wore insulated tactical jackets, dark snow pants, and helmets equipped with thermal visors. The same emblem from earlier concentric spirals decorated their sleeves. The man in front carried a compact carbine pointed at the ground but angled high enough to matter. Easy, Rowan said. I'm just step away, the leader repeated, tone flat as steel. Rowan raised his hands and backed up. This land isn't yours, he said evenly. It's under lawful survey by Voss Geothermal, the leader replied. You're interfering with a federal energy initiative, Rowan snorted. Pretty sure federal agents don't hide their badges or shove rangers down ravines. The leader didn't react. This site is restricted. Leave. Ember growled again, more forceful this time. The leader's visor shifted toward her. Control your animal. She's not the one pointing a weapon, Rowan replied. A tense silence stretched between them, snow falling harder, now thickening the air. The leader finally lowered his rifle. We're giving you one chance. Walk away. Rowan held his gaze. You drill here, you crack this mountain, you'll destabilize the whole region. We know exactly what's beneath, the leader said. And it's not your concern. Rowan's jaw tightened. It is if you blow us all to hell. A pause too long, too thoughtful. Final warning, the leader said. Go home. They turned and vanished into the trees with military precision boots, whispering over the snow. Within seconds, they blended into the gray-white woods, leaving only their footprints and the scanner behind. Rowan exhaled, muscles taut. Ember pressed against his leg, trembling with leftover adrenaline. Easy, Rowan murmured, stroking her head. You did good. Her tail flicked once. He knelt beside the sensor and yanked the battery free. The screen flickered, then died. That should slow them down. But slowing wasn't stopping. And the way the leader spoke, it wasn't corporate greed. It was conviction, purpose. Like he believed whatever lay below was worth any cost. Rowan pocketed the battery and turned to leave. Ember stiffened nose, turning sharply downhill. "What now?" Rowan whispered. She darted ahead, paws plunging into the powder. "Ember, wait." He followed, stumbling, as the slope grew steep. Ember zigzagged through underbrush until she reached a narrow ravine. Rowan slid down after her, grabbing at roots for balance. At the bottom, beneath an overhang of rock and ice, lay something unexpected. A ladder. Wooden. Weathered. Leading down into a dark shaft. Rowan's breath hitched. A mine tunnel. Ember sniffed at the edge, ears flattened. Rowan knelt beside her, brushing snow from the opening. The scent rising from below was unmistakable. Warm. Wet earth. Moss. And something else. Metal rusting slowly over decades. He shined his flashlight into the shaft. Old timbers lined the walls. Broken tracks ran deeper into blackness. Faint air circulated upward, warm and moist, fogging Rowan's beam. "This connects to the heat pocket," Rowan murmured. Ember tapped his knee lightly. "Yeah," he said. "We're going in." He tested the ladder, solid enough. "Stay close. Don't rush." He descended carefully, boots landing on damp stone 20 feet below. Ember followed with surprising agility, dropping lightly beside him. The tunnel was warmer than the surface. A thin film of condensation coated the walls. Water dripped rhythmically from overhead, echoing through the passage like slow heartbeat ticks. Rowan swept his light across the chamber. Old mining equipment, rusted shovels, a cart half filled with stone, and on the wall markings. Spirals carved into the rock. Dozens of them, interlocking, some faint and eroded, others clean-cut, almost new. Rowan approached one and brushed it with his fingers. Cold rock, warm ridges. "What is this?" he whispered. Ember sniffed a corner of the chamber, then froze. Rowan followed her gaze. A journal lay half buried under gravel. He picked it up gingerly. The cover was cracked leather held together with twine. He flipped it open. Faded, penciled sketches. Diagrams of the ridge. Temperature readings. Notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. "The warmth isn't geothermal. Resonates with low frequencies. Detected a rhythmic pulse at 32.8 hertzes. Rowan's heart thudded. The pulse. The warmth. The spirals. This wasn't an old mine. It was a study. A deep hum rolled through the tunnel, shaking dust from overhead beams. Ember pressed close to Rowan's leg. He scanned the journal again, flipping deeper, until a torn page caught his eye, bearing a name written in fading ink. Dr. Elias Arden, Primary Research, Lead Arden. Rowan blinked. The abandoned research scientist. The man missing for 4 years. Ember, Rowan whispered, "This is bigger than geothermal surveys." Ember nudged the journal gently. "We're not alone down here," Rowan murmured. A distant metallic clang echoed through the tunnels, loud enough to shake loose a shower of pebbles. Rowan grabbed Ember's collar. "Move." They sprinted back to the ladder as another clang boomed behind them, followed by a muffled roar drilling deep and violent, vibrating through the rock. Voss's crew, drilling into the ridge. Rowan scrambled up the ladder, Ember clambering beside him. They reached the surface as a tremor rippled across the slope, sending a small avalanche of snow down the ravine. Rowan pulled Ember back just in time. "Come on," he shouted. They climbed toward the ridge, lungs burning. Another tremor. Another boom. A warning. A threat. A countdown. Rowan didn't stop moving. "They're going to break the mountain," he gasped. Ember barked sharply, as if agreeing. Rowan's hand tightened around the journal. "We're not letting them do it." The mountain hummed again, longer this time, almost like an answer. The next tremor hit harder. Snow slid from the branches in heavy sheets, shattering the quiet. Somewhere beneath the eastern slope, metal chewed through stone with a grinding fury that set Rowan's teeth on edge. Ember ran slightly ahead of him, pausing every few steps to look back, making sure he kept up. By the time they reached the crest of the ridge, Rowan could see it. Voss's operation. Heavy trucks were parked in a rough semicircle at the base of a bluff, their engines rumbling. A mobile drill rig far too large for any legitimate survey was anchored near the rock face, its spinning head sending up a plume of dust and steam. Temporary floodlights bathed the scene in a harsh white glare. Men in helmets and insulated vests moved like insects around the equipment, shouting over the machine's roar. Rowan and Ember crouched behind a stand of pines. "You weren't exaggerating," Rowan muttered under his breath. Ember's ears flattened, a soft growl vibrating in her chest. The drill bit cut deeper, sending out another wave of vibration. The pulse from the mountain stuttered, then tried to readjust like a heart skipping beats. Rowan's grip tightened on the journal. "They're punching right into it," he whispered. A tall man stepped out from behind one of the truck's coat cleaner boots, newer than the rest. His parka bore the same spiral patch, but his was framed in silver thread. He surveyed the operation with an expression of practiced satisfaction. Rylan Voss. Rowan didn't need an introduction. He recognized the type, the one who believed the world was made to be carved up, measured, sold. Voss lifted a radio to his mouth. Status A, Foreman yelled back. We're through the outer crust. Temperature spike is holding stable 30 degrees above ambient. Whatever's under there is hot, sir. Voss smiled. Good. We're not here for warm feelings, gentlemen. We're here for measurable output. Rowan's jaw clenched. Output, he muttered. He's talking about a living system like it's a battery. Ember shifted attention, flicking from the rig to the ridge behind them. Rowan followed her gaze. The trees far above the drilling site swayed not from wind, but in a strange ripple, as if something under the ground pushed upward for a moment. Then a gust of air rushed out from the direction of the spiraled clearing, carrying with it a palpable warmth. The rig's engines sputtered. One of the workers shouted, "Hey, the readings!" A sharp chime rang out from the sensor Rowan had disabled earlier, now reactivated and mounted on a utility sled. Its screen flashed wildly from gold to red. "Sir, the thermal field just expanded," the foreman yelled. "The heat's not just below us anymore. It's spreading uphill-downhill," Voss frowned. "What are you talking about?" Rowan's heart hammered. Heat field, spreading. The pulses weren't random. They were adjusting, compensating, trying to stabilize. A memory slammed into him, unexpectedly cold nights in Afghanistan, his unit sheltering in half-buried culverts, bodies pressed together for warmth. The way a few heat sources placed right could keep the whole group from freezing. Systems, balance, distribution. What if the mountain wasn't just housing heat? What if it was managing it? Not a vent, Rowan whispered. A regulator. Ember looked up at him, eyes reflecting the distant floodlights. "If they break it," he said, barely breathing the words, "this whole valley loses its anchor. The cold won't just settle, it'll slam." The drill screeched as it hit another layer. A crack like distant thunder echoed across the ridge. Workers staggered. The ground beneath Rowan's boots jumped. Ember braced herself, claws digging into the snow. "Pull back," someone shouted near the rig. "Pressure spike," Voss raised a hand, silencing them. "Hold steady," he barked. "We expected volatility. Keep drilling. Sir, if the cavity collapses, then we'll adjust and drill again. Keep going." Rowan's nails bit into the leather cover of the journal. He opened it to one of the later entries. "If stability is disturbed for too long, thermal equilibrium collapses. The result isn't gradual cooling, it's catastrophic flash freeze. Radius unknown." He read the lines twice, throat tightening. "This place doesn't just stay warm because of the chamber," he whispered. "The chamber keeps everything else from going deadly cold." Ember huffed breath, curling in the chill. "We're not protecting some science project," Rowan murmured. "We're protecting the only thing keeping this mountain alive." A series of images hit him fast. Mrs. Keller at the diner, hands on her hips. Sheriff Mara's tired smile. The kid who came into town last fall with cheeks red from frostbite, staring wide-eyed at Ember like she was a myth. Where would they be if the valley dropped 40 degrees overnight? Would they even wake up? The drill screamed again, then stopped. Silence rushed in, too sharp, too sudden. "What happened?" Voss demanded. A worker shouted. "We hit a hollow open space below." Rowan's chest seized. They'd found the chamber's outer skin. Voss grinned. "Perfect. Prep the exploratory line. We'll send a camera and sample tube. I want readings in the next 15 minutes. Rowan's mind raced. 15 minutes. Maybe less before they breached the chamber fully. Before they damaged something that had been quietly protecting this valley, long before any of them showed up. "Okay," he whispered, decision crystallizing. "We can't wait for permits. We can't wait for reports. We don't have time." Ember watched him, still as stone. "We have to get down there first." He flipped the journal to a page he'd skimmed earlier, now suddenly crucial. A hand-drawn map showed an interconnected system of tunnels beneath the ridge, vent shafts, maintenance access, routes, pressure relief, galleries. One tunnel was circled several times. Primary acoustic access. Use only when systemic resonance is stable. The label beneath it made his skin prickle. North Mine Spur, old entrance. The same tunnel he and Ember had just explored. He checked the orientation in his mind. If they followed it deeper, past the point where they'd turned around, what would it connect to? Ember shifted closer, tail low but firm. "Ready." "You're right," he murmured. "We go back in. But this time we don't stop at the old equipment." He slid the journal into his pack eyes, never leaving the drill site. "I'll need a diversion," he whispered. "Something to keep them focused topside." Ember stood abruptly and trotted a few steps downhill, then looked over her shoulder. "What are you?" She barked 3 sharp beats, then sprinted along the outer edge of the trees just inside the floodlight's reach. One of the workers pointed. "Dog, we've got a dog out there," Voss turned sharply. "Catch it. If it's a stray, it might have rabies. We don't need a liability incident." Two men broke off from the rig and moved after Ember, who slipped in and out of the light like smoke always just out of reach, always drawing them farther from the ravine. Rowan almost smiled despite himself. "Good girl," he whispered. When the men had gone far enough, Rowan moved in the opposite direction, sticking to shadows, sliding down the slope toward the ravine where the mineshaft waited. The rumble of engines faded slightly behind him, replaced by the deeper, slower thrum from within the earth. By the time he reached the mine entrance, Ember was already there. She dropped from the ridge above, landing lightly beside him, tongue lolling, eyes bright. "You had them chasing you?" Rowan asked. Her tail wagged once. He shook his head. "Show off." But pride warmed him more than the hidden air rising from the shaft. They descended again, flashlight beam bouncing off damp stone. The hum grew stronger, the deeper they went, no longer just a background noise, but a layered chorus of low tones overlapping, climbing, dropping, weaving together in patterns. Rowan couldn't decode. At the chamber where he'd found the journal, Ember didn't pause this time. She continued along the rail tracks toward the far end of the tunnel where darkness pooled like ink. Rowan followed, wiping moisture from his brow. "How much farther?" he murmured. The tunnel curved subtly. As they rounded the bend, the air changed. Warmer, richer. Carrying a scent Rowan hadn't smelled since his childhood in the south, wet soil after rain-growing things, the faint sweetness of flowering plants. Impossible. His breath caught. The tunnel widened abruptly and opened into a vast cavern. Rowan stopped at the threshold, stunned. Below him, spread like a glowing bowl, carved into the mountain's heart, lay a garden no winter should contain. Moss carpets, small trees heavy with leaves, vines climbing along rock, pools of gently steaming water reflecting light from pulsating crystals embedded in the ceiling. Light that wasn't electric, light that pulsed in time with the mountain's hum. Ember stepped beside him, ears forward, tail slowly lifting. Rowan whispered the only word that fit. "Sanctuary." His voice bounced softly off the walls and came back altered, warmer somehow. The realization hit him fully then, not as theory but as lived truth. This wasn't just a chamber storing heat. This place distributed it, balanced it, maintained it. Like a beating heart. A heart that had been quietly keeping this valley livable for decades. Maybe longer. And now men with drills and greed were about to stick a steel bit straight through it. "This is what they're going to break," Rowan murmured, throat tight. Ember sat on the stone beside him and gave a single low whine. The sound echoed, picked up by some unseen system, folded into the soft thrum filling the chamber. For a moment, the light overhead flickered brighter, as if the sanctuary had heard them, as if it were waiting to know whether he'd defend it or let it die. The moment Rowan stepped fully into the chamber, the temperature rose another breath. Not hot, just warm enough that the sting of winter evaporated from his skin. Ember patted a head paws, sinking into soft moss that shouldn't exist within 100 miles of this climate. Rowan knelt, brushing his hand along the emerald carpet. Dew gathered on his glove. A living ecosystem thriving under tons of rock and ice. "Someone built all this," he whispered, awe tightening his throat. Ember sniffed a cluster of tiny blue flowers, then sneezed softly. A strange musical ring answered her from the walls themselves. A cascade of gentle vibrations rippled through the cavern, refracting through crystal-like structures embedded overhead. "Acoustic heat," Rowan murmured. "Just like the notes in the journal." He shined his light across the space, finding copper-like conduits winding through stone, pressure valves shaped like organic petals, circular plates arranged in patterns that reminded him of tuning forks. This wasn't nature. This was engineered harmony. "This whole place is a resonator," Rowan whispered. Ember's ears flicked toward a deeper part of the chamber. Rowan followed her gaze. Another tunnel. Narrow. Faintly glowing. As if inviting them in. "Only one way to know," he said softly. They entered the passage. The second chamber was smaller. More focused. A dome of smooth stone rose above a central pool, fed by several warm trickles. Around it stood ring-shaped pillars, each etched with spiraling lines identical to the charm Rowan carried. A brass stand stood near the pool, broken, rusted, overgrown with delicate vines. On it sat a metal plaque half swallowed by plant life. Rowan tore away enough moss to read main regulator node authorized personnel only Project Airhaven divided by cycle prototype 3 lead engineer. Dr. Elias Arden. Rowan exhaled sharply. "Arden, you really built it," he murmured. He ran his fingers along the spirals, etched into the pillar beside him. The lines warmed faintly beneath his touch, responding to skin temperature rhythm he couldn't tell which. Ember pawed at the base of a different pillar. Rowan knelt beside her. This one contained a small depression, circular smooth, the size of a coin. "No, not a coin," he said. "A key slot." He pulled out the wooden charm he'd found and held it up. The spirals matched perfectly, but the charm was too big for the slot. Wrong material, wrong dimensions. Maybe the charm wasn't the key. Maybe it just pointed to one. Rowan's stomach nodded. If Arden died out, there did the real key die with him. Another tremor rolled faintly through the mountain. Rowan stood. Ember barked once, head snapping upward. "That was closer," Rowan said. "The drill. They were almost through." He paced, mind racing. If they break the regulator node, the whole system collapses. The valley freezes, and so does anyone outside. His breath came shallow, tight. He had to go topside. He had to stop the rig. "Come on," he said, turning toward the main chamber, but Ember stayed. "Ember. Let's go." Her tail dropped. She whimpered low, backing slightly toward the regulator pillar. "Ember, what's wrong?" She pawed at the stone again. Gently, intentionally. Rowan watched, heart pounding. "Something's missing," he whispered, "and you know it." Ember backed toward the pool. Rowan followed. Inside the water, something glinted. He leaned closer. Beneath the shallow surface, half buried in silt, was a small metallic object, round-patterned. He plunged his hand in. The water was warm like a heated bath. He grasped the object and lifted it out. A medallion. No, a key. A metal coin etched with the same spirals. Perfect size for the depression on the pillar. "How?" Rowan whispered. "How did you know?" Ember only sat and waited. Rowan wiped the medallion clean and slid it into the depression on the pillar. Silence. Then the pillar vibrated. A low tone emerged. A second vibration came from the opposite pillar. Then another and another, until the entire chamber began humming in layered harmony. Light raced through the spirals, flowing from pillar to pillar like a pulse awakening veins. A voice echoed, faintly broken, fragmentary, old. "System. Stability. Hold. Pressure. Reroute." Ember pressed close to Rowan's leg. "It's activating," he murmured. "The entire sanctuary is reacting." A cracking boom reverberated from above, making dust fall from the ceiling. "Oh no," Rowan breathed. "They're breaching." He pulled the medallion free. The glow faded instantly. Ember barked, sharply urgent. "We're out of time," Rowan said. He sprinted back up the tunnel, Ember on his heels. It was nearly dark when they reached the mine entrance again. Snow fell in thick veils. The hum from the mountain stuttered wrong, uneven. They climbed toward the ridge. The closer they got, the harsher the mechanical roar became. But when they broke through the tree line, Rowan stopped cold. The rig, its massive drill, was smoking. Sparks shot out from beneath the housing. Workers shouted, rushing with extinguishers. Voss stood nearby with clenched fists. His radio crackled. Pressure spike. "We've hit a secondary cavity." Rowan felt his blood drain. They'd gouged the wrong part of the system. The sanctuary wasn't just responding, it was struggling. The mountain breathed a long, shuddering breath, then trembled. A blast of warm air shot up from a crack near the rig, throwing 2 workers to the ground. Steam geysered upward, swirling with glowing dust that shimmered like embers. "Cut the power," a foreman yelled. "We're destabilizing it." Voss grabbed him by the coat. "You keep drilling or you're done. I didn't spend $10 million to quit because of a little steam." "Sir, the ground." The ground beneath the rig lurched. A thunderous crack split the earth. A panel of stone the size of a truck roof buckled outward, glowing faintly with orange light underneath. Ember barked, backing up. Rowan grabbed her collar. "Move." A second crack tore through the ground. Floodlights toppled. Men scrambled. One fell into the widening fissure and dangled by a cable. The mountain let out a deep groaning sound like a wounded animal. Rowan's voice came out hoarse. "They're killing it." Another tremor hit strong enough to knock Rowan to one knee. Ember pressed against him, steadying him. Rowan forced himself upright. "I have to stop the breach," he said. Ember huffed sharply, nudging his pack, specifically the journal inside. "Right," Rowan whispered. Arden's notes. He pulled the journal open to the diagram of the pressure tunnels. "If I can reach the acoustic valves, I can reroute the pressure. Stabilize the chamber." A nearby floodlight flickered, illuminating the spiraled ridge. It glowed faintly, struggling. A deep, cold dread filled Rowan's chest. This wasn't just a threat. It was a countdown. "Ember," he whispered, "I have to go back inside." But Ember stepped in front of him, blocking him. "Ember." She whined, pressing her head to his thigh, shaking slightly. Rowan's throat tightened. His dog wasn't afraid of the dark. Not afraid of danger. Not afraid of tunnels. She was afraid of losing him. "Hey," Rowan whispered, kneeling. "Hey, look at me." Ember raised her head slowly. You think I'm going to leave you like before? His voice cracked, like I left Ash. Ember leaned into him, eyes soft. Rowan buried his face in her fur for one breath too. I'm not that man anymore, he whispered. Ember's tail moved just once. He rose. We're doing this together, he said. Ember stepped beside him without hesitation. Rowan stared toward the fissure, toward the collapsing ridge, toward the heart of the system that had kept this valley alive for decades, and toward the men who would kill it for a profit sheet. The wind howled like warning. Rowan clenched the medallion key in his fist. Let's save the mountain, he said softly. Then he ran into the storm. Ember sprinted beside him fearless. Ready. The fissure yawned wider with every step Rowan took. Steam poured from the crack near the crippled rig, lit ghost white by the remaining floodlights. The air snapped between hot and cold in jerks like the mountain couldn't decide which way to break. Men scrambled to drag equipment back. Metal screamed. The earth moaned. Ember stayed tight against Rowan's leg as they threaded through overturned crates and abandoned cables. Stay low, Rowan whispered. If this vent blows, we don't want to be standing upwind. She huffed once, then kept moving. No one noticed them at first. Panic had a way of shrinking people's focus. But as Rowan neared the fissure, Rylan Voss turned face-flushed eyes sharp in the chaotic light. You, Voss snapped. I warned you off this site. Rowan didn't stop. Call your rig back. You're tearing into a regulator system you don't understand. Voss laughed once, breathless. Regulator, that's some story. You've read too many eco-thriller blogs. Another tremor hit. Everyone staggered. The rig's crippled arm groaned. From deeper in the mountain, Rowan heard it, the chamber's hum jagged and wrong like a choir trying to sing while drowning. Look around you, Rowan said, gesturing at the steaming crack. Does that look stable to you? Voss's jaw hardened. We're within acceptable risk. Risk of what Rowan snapped. A flash freeze across this valley, you punch a hole straight through that sanctuary, the whole system collapses. You don't get a geothermal plant, you get a graveyard. For a heartbeat, something like doubt flickered in Voss's eyes. Then it vanished. You have no proof, he said. All I see is a man squatting on something valuable and trying to scare us off. A pair of headlights cut through the storm. A sheriff's SUV slid to a stop just beyond the trucks, lights strobing red and blue against the snow. Mara Haskins climbed out, coat thrown over her uniform hat pulled low against the wind. Everyone stand down, she shouted. Back away from the fissure and kill that engine. One of the workers yelled back reflexively. We don't answer to county patrol, ma'am. You answer to me when you're on this land, Mara returned. And right now you're on the edge of a disaster scene. She spotted Rowan and Ember near the crack, her eyes widening. You picked one heck of a time for a hike, Hale. Working on it, he called. We need to relieve the pressure, not fight it. Voss stepped between them. Sheriff, you're out of your depth. This is a sanctioned corporate operation. You delay us and you'll be facing a legal storm you can't imagine. Mara stared at him a long beat. You already brought me a storm, she said. Let's start with the battered ranger in my jurisdiction and the survey crew that thinks explosives are a first resort. Voss's lips thinned. I don't know what you've been told, but another crack split the ground closer this time. A jagged line shot outward from the fissure, racing toward a secondary vent higher on the slope. Steam erupted in a burst, flinging slush into the air. Rowan's instincts snapped back into command mode. The system's overloaded, he said. It's trying to vent away from your drill. If the secondary vents can't carry it, it'll blow from below. And your plan, Mara called. Rowan held up the medallion key. This activates a regulator node down in a chamber beneath us. It can redirect pressure through a safer path if I get the timing right. And if you don't, then we're all icicles, Rowan said. But if I do nothing, we're still icicles. So this is an upgrade. Mara's gaze flicked from the steaming fissure to the trucks to Voss to Ember. She nodded once. Do it. Voss barked a harsh laugh. You're trusting a drifter and his dog over engineered equipment and licensed experts. Mara's eyes burned cold. Right now, yes. Voss's expression shuddered. Fine, he said. You want to play hero Hale, go ahead. But I'm not shutting down operations based on mountain fairy tales. He signaled to a pair of workers near the rig. Prep the shaped charges. If the drill can't open that cavity cleanly, we will. Rowan stared at him. You detonate explosives near that vent, and there won't be anything left to open. Then we'd better move fast, Voss replied. Rowan didn't waste breath arguing. He sprinted back toward the ravine, Ember right with him. Snow whipped sideways, now driven by gusts that seemed to come from underground instead of sky. The mountain groaned again, long and low. Clock's ticking, girl, Rowan muttered. They dropped into the mine entrance, descended the ladder, and pushed through the tunnel at a run. The warm, damp air hit them harder than before, tinged with metallic tang and something else, ozone sharp and restless. The sanctuary chamber wasn't serene now. Light flickered erratically in the crystals above. Pools sloshed against their stone edges. The hum had broken into overlapping pulses that kept tripping over each other. Systems panicking, Rowan said. He and Ember plunged into the regulator dome. The pillars there vibrated visibly, the spirals glowing in disjointed patterns. Rowan slammed the medallion into its slot. The pillars flared in response. A tone rang out clear, rising, then fractured, warbling to one side like a mistuned instrument. "Come on," Rowan whispered. "Lock in. Lock in." He flipped the journal open with one hand, scanning Arden's cramped notes under the dancing light. If external disturbance compromises, flow system can reharmonize via manual input at central node. Correct sequence, bass tone, then harmonic rise, then 3-beat cadence to seal. Rowan stared at the lines. He knew those rhythms. He'd felt them in the ground. He'd heard them in the mountain. More importantly, he'd heard them in Ember's bark. Bass, rise, then 3, he murmured. The pillars hummed unevenly, waiting. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're going to talk to it." He closed his eyes, remembering the pulse that had rattled his boots on the ridge, the way Ember had barked 3 times at the warmth under the snow. He inhaled and let his chest echo the mountain's lowest tone, humming from deep in his diaphragm. The pillars responded, their bass rings lighting in soft amber. Good. He raised the pitch slightly, following the wavering hum overhead, matching it, smoothing it. The light climbed up the spiral steadier now. The cavern's shuddering eased just a little. Still not enough. "Last part," he whispered, breath ragged. 3 beats. To seal. He looked at Ember. She looked back, ears, tilted brow, furrowing in that way she got when she was thinking hard. "You've been hearing it longer than I have," Rowan said. "You know how it's supposed to sound." Ember stepped forward, placing both front paws on the stone ring surrounding the pool. She lifted her head and howled. Not a long, mournful cry. Not a panicked yelp. 3 clear pulsed notes. 1, 2, 3. They rose, held, and dropped in perfect counterpoint to the mountain's broken hum. The sound threaded through the chamber, caught by the pillars, amplified, folded back on itself. Light raced along the spirals. The hum snapped into focus. Not chaos now. Chorus. Heat surged through the room, then steadied. Above them, the mountain's rumbling smoothed into deep measured pulses like a heart finding its proper rhythm again. Rowan sagged with relief. "You did it," he breathed. "You actually did it." Ember shook out her fur as if to say, "Of course." But the reprieve wasn't complete. A sharper vibration shot through the floor, a spike rather than a wave. Rowan's eyes snapped open. "That's not the system," he whispered. "That's external. Explosives. Voss's charges. The sanctuary could reroute pressure. It couldn't ignore a direct blast near an exposed vent." Rowan grabbed the medallion back out of the slot. "Come on," he said. "We stabilized the heart. Now we have to save the skin." They ran. Snow thrummed under Rowan's boots as he and Ember scrambled out of the mine. Wind clawed at his coat, flinging ice shards into his face. The fissure near the rig burned brighter, now steam rushing out in intermittent jets. Mara had pulled most workers back, clustering them near the trucks. A few argued loudly. She shut them down with the force of someone who had run out of patience twice already tonight. Voss stood at the fissure's edge, coat flapping. A small black device blinked in his gloved hand, a remote detonator. Cables ran from its transmitter across the ground, disappearing into snow-packed holes along the vent's rim. "Stop," Rowan shouted. "You trigger that, you collapse the regulator's outer shell." Voss turned slowly. "You're still alive." "Impressive." He held the detonator higher. "You want my finger off this switch. Convince me it's worth more than what's under our feet." Rowan approached carefully, Ember close beside him. "You ever wonder," Rowan called, raising his voice over the wind, "why this valley never froze like the surrounding ranges? Why farms didn't fail here the way they did 10 miles out microclimate?" Voss said dismissively. "We mapped it. It's why we're here." "Yeah," Rowan replied. "A microclimate maintained by the system you're tearing into." He pointed up the slope toward the trees. "There's a sanctuary under us, Voss. A self-sustaining thermal garden built into the mountain's core. It doesn't just hold heat, it distributes it. It's been saving generations of people here without them ever knowing." Voss's mouth twisted. "Nice story. No evidence." "You felt that last spike?" Rowan asked. "The surge that almost blew your rig off its anchor. That was the system trying not to tear itself apart because of you." Voss's gaze flicked over the steaming crack. "Even if you're right," he said slowly, "do you know what it would mean to tap something like that? Whole regions stabilized, energy redirected, Winter turned into opportunity. At what cost? Rowan shot back. You weaponize this, sell it to the highest bidder, and the first time something goes wrong, you don't just black out a town. You kill a climate. He took another step. Sheriff's got enough to bury you on assault charges alone, Rowan said, but that's not why I'm here. I don't care if you spend the next 10 years in court. I care about the next 10 minutes. The ground shivered. Mara called from behind him. He's right about one thing, Voss. We've got witnesses, logs, and injured employees. I can make this site a legal nightmare before dawn. You really want to add knowingly caused an environmental disaster to your list. Voss's grip on the detonator tightened. You think I'm bluffing? I think you're scared, Rowan said. He saw it now, the flicker in Voss's eyes that wasn't greed but desperation. If this project failed, Voss lost more than money. He lost standing, credibility, identity. A man like that would rather burn the map than admit he misread it. Rowan's heart hammered. You pull that trigger, you don't just bury some prototype. You bury your own leverage. There'll be nothing left to study, nothing left to sell. Just a dead mountain and a lot of bodies. He nodded toward Ember. And she'll remember exactly who did it. Voss sneered. It's a dog. Yeah, Rowan said quietly. The last one who warned me about a collapse died because I didn't listen in time. The wind dropped for one suspended second. Under everyone's boots, the mountain gave a long, aching groan. We have a chance, Rowan said. Right now, the regulators stabilized. If we let it adjust, it'll vent through safe channels. You stand down, we walk away alive, and you still get to say you found something extraordinary even if you don't own it. Voss stared at him, breath-visible expression unreadable. Then his thumb twitched toward the switch. Wrong answer, he said. He pressed. Nothing happened. He frowned, pressing again. Silence. What a blur of motion cut across Rowan's field of view. Ember. She'd vanished from his side the moment his attention locked on Voss's eyes. Now she burst out from behind a half-buried equipment crate, jaws snapping around the transmitter cable that snaked from the detonator into the snow. She bit down. Hard. The cable sparked, then went dark. Voss shouted in shock, stumbling backward. Get away from that, he barked. He lunged at Ember. Rowan moved without thinking. He slammed into Voss, shoulder first, knocking his arm aside. The detonator flew from his hand and skidded toward the fissure. Ember darted after it, batting it away from the steaming crack with one quick swipe of her paw. The plastic casing chipped. The indicator light winked out. Behind them, one of the partially set charges coughed weakly, then fizzled, ejecting a puff of smoke. Diffused. Ember yelped as a tiny fragment of shrapnel grazed her flank, but she stayed on her feet, teeth bared. Rowan's world narrowed. You all right, he gasped. She shook once, then braced herself ready. Voss pushed himself up from the snow, face white with fury. You stupid, he charged. Rowan shifted to intercept, but the ground chose that moment to heave in a sudden jolt. The fissure widened inches more. Voss's footing slipped. His momentum carried him toward the edge. He windmilled, grabbing at empty air. Rowan lunged, catching Voss's wrist. Their combined weight dragged Rowan to his knees, boots scraping at the crumbling edge. Steam blasted his face. The roar from the vent filled his ears. Don't you let go, Voss shouted, panic cracking through his arrogance at last. Rowan's grip ached. His muscles screamed. He thought of another ledge. Another fall. Hands he didn't reach in time. Not this time. Ember back, he shouted. For once she obeyed immediately, giving him space. Rowan dug his heels into the snow, leaned back and hauled Voss up inch by inch. His shoulders burned. His vision hazed with effort. Then Mara was there, grabbing Voss's other arm, teeth gritted. On three, she said. 1, 2, 3, they heaved. Voss slid onto solid ground, gasping snow caked in his hair. He lay there staring up at the sky, as if surprised it was still there. Mara cuffed his wrists before he could stand. Voss sputtered. You can't. Oh, I can, Mara said. Reckless endangerment. Assault. Tampering with a regulated site. And that's before the environmental agencies get their turn. Rowan staggered back, every muscle shaking. Ember pressed against his thigh, then nosed his hand insistently until he dropped it onto her head. Warm fur. Solid weight. Alive. He laughed once, breathless. You're the one who saved us, you know. Her tail thumped weakly. Under their feet, the mountain's vibration shifted again. Not violent now. Slow. Steady. Recovering. Rowan turned his face toward the ridge. Steam still rose from the vent, but less furiously. The air no longer fluctuated between extremes. It settled into a strange, gentle equilibrium. The sanctuary was healing. Because they had bought it time. Because he had listened. An hour later, the trucks were idling in a neat line at the edge of the makeshift site, waiting for clearance to leave. Mara had ordered all drilling equipment shut down, all charges removed, all personnel interviewed. Deputies from town had arrived red-faced and wide-eyed, unused to anything more dramatic than a bar fight. Evans, the injured ranger, was in the back of Mara's SUV under blankets talking quietly to a paramedic. His voice shook when he spoke, but he kept glancing out the window whenever Ember passed by, as if using her as a fixed point. Rowan sat on a crate near the tree line, Ember's head resting on his knee. Bandages circled her flank where the shrapnel had grazed her. It would scar lightly, but she'd heal. Mara walked over snow crunching under her boots. "You two make a habit of turning my quiet valley into a disaster movie," she asked. Rowan huffed. "I prefer preventing to starring in." Ember wagged her tail once as if agreeing. Mara's expression softened. "You really went down there. To the place that's been humming under our feet all these years," Rowan nodded. "It's real. A whole engineered sanctuary, heat water plants, acoustic systems, to move warmth through the rock. Someone built a heart under this mountain and just left it to beat." And now she asked, "It's stable, for now." He glanced toward the ridge. "It'll need watching. Respect. We can't poke it every time we want more heat." Mara folded her arms. "What do we tell the agencies? They're going to come asking about this mess." "The truth," Rowan said. "Up to a point." He met her eyes. "Call it a sensitive environmental anomaly, a natural regulator system we don't fully understand. Protected status. No drilling, no mining, no cameras. You have Arden's data logs and Evans's testimony. You don't need my journal." "What about you?" Mara asked. "You planning on disappearing now that you've scared off the big bad wolf?" Rowan looked down at Ember. She gazed back, eyes steady, waiting. He thought of the cabin, of Mrs. Keller's generator, of the kid with frostbitten cheeks, of the way Ember had stepped onto the stone ring and sung the sanctuary back into rhythm. "I thought I'd leave," he admitted. "Before all this, I didn't think I belonged anywhere that needed me." Mara's brow creased. And now he scratched Ember behind the ears. "Now I'm sitting on top of the only reason this valley isn't a frozen wasteland," he said. "And my dog apparently speaks the same language as the thing keeping it that way." He took a slow breath. "So I'm thinking, maybe I stay. Help keep it safe. Keep people warm when the storms get bad. Make sure no one tries this again." Mara's smile was small but genuine. Dry Creek could use a good guardian. The mountain, too. Ember nudged Rowan's hand as if to say the vote was unanimous. "Guess that settles it," Rowan murmured. He looked out over the ridge one more time. The wind had softened. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, gentler now, as if the mountain exhaled in relief. Far below, unseen under rock and ice, a sanctuary pulsed with quiet, steady heat, answering the cold not with violence but with balance. Rowan felt something shift in his chest. Not the sharp crack of a breaking thing. The slow, careful thaw of something that had been frozen too long. He curled his fingers into Ember's fur. "We did okay this time," he whispered. She leaned her weight into him, solid and certain. For the first time in years, he believed it. Snow fell softly across the ridge that evening, drifting like ash from a slow-burning fire. The storm clouds had eased into a pale gray hush, leaving the world wrapped in a quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. Rowan and Ember followed the narrow path back toward the cabin, their footprints weaving side by side through fresh powder. The air was different now. Not warmer winter still ruled these hills, but balanced. The cold carried no edge, no threat. It settled gently on Rowan's coat and clung to Ember's fur without sinking. A harmonious Rowan paused at the crest, overlooking the valley. Down below, porch lights glimmered from distant homes, small beacons scattered along the dark trees. Life carried on. Families cooked dinner. Raw. And none of Ember nudged Rowan's hand, sensing the weight of his thoughts. "Yeah," Rowan murmured, sliding a gloved hand along her neck. She leaned lightly against him, steady as a pea. For years, Rowan had lived as if the world behind him had burned down and the world ahead held only fog. He'd convinced himself that drifting was safer than staying, that people were better off without a man who'd once made a mistake that cost a good dog his life. He'd called it humility, but Ember had never believed in that version of him. She'd followed him into shadows he wouldn't have entered alone. She'd sensed danger before he had. She'd trusted him even when he didn't trust himself. A sanctuary under the mountain had been built on harmony, sound-feeding warmth, warmth-feeding life. A system that worked only when every part listened to every other. Rowan realized, standing there under the soft snowfall, that the mountain hadn't been the only thing out of balance. He had been too. "Thank you," he whispered to Ember, "for pulling me back. She looked up, amber eyes reflecting the last traces of daylight. A single soft sound rumbled in her throat, neither bark nor whine, more like an acknowledgement. They walked the rest of the way in companionable quiet. When the cabin came into view, its windows glowed with lamplight. Mara had stopped by while they were gone. Her cruiser tracks were still visible and left a small tin of biscuits on the porch with a note tucked underneath. For Ember. For the valley. Glad you stayed. Rowan chuckled softly and pocketed the note. Inside the stove hummed with warmth. Ember circled her mat once before, settling with a slow sigh. Rowan hung his coat, lit another lamp, and set his pack down by the table. Before he could sit, the floor beneath his feet gave one soft, warm vibration barely noticeable, like the final exhale of someone settling into sleep. The sanctuary. It wasn't calling, it was thanking. Rowan stepped to the window, watching the snow drift under the pale light. He rested a hand on the glass. "I'll keep it safe," he murmured. "You can rest now." Behind him, Ember's tail thumped twice against the wooden floor. Rowan smiled. Faith, he realized, wasn't a flash of light or a grand revelation. It was a quiet return to warmth, a gradual thaw. Sometimes it was a stranger's kindness, sometimes a mountain's hum, sometimes a dog's steady heart refusing to give up on a man who had forgotten how to forgive himself. Outside, winter continued its endless dance. But inside the cabin, a new promise lived, gentle, resilient, warm. Rowan Pike wasn't lost anymore. Ember had found him, and together they would keep the valley alive through every storm to come. END.